In the world of high finance, goods and services are traded with the push of a button. Money can be transferred electronically across continents in the blink of an eye, as multinational companies and their subsidiaries seek to maximise their profits across borders for themselves and their shareholders.
But not everyone benefits from this sophisticated financial juggling, and the ones who are losing out the most are a long way from financial centres like this.
People in the developing world are like people anywhere. They want education for their children, good healthcare, and at the very least, basic sanitation and clean water. But this all costs money, money that they don't have. In wealthier countries, these goals have been achieved largely thanks to a little three-letter word: tax.
What I want to say is that I believe every human being should be given decent living conditions. And that's why I was saying that tax is so important to Africa, because it is a way of raising revenue for development.
Now, even some of the world's poorest people often have to pay tax, such as VAT, on what they buy. But what about the big multinational companies that are profiting every day from doing business in developing countries?
Would it surprise you to know that 160 billion US dollars a year is lost to these countries because of tax dodging by some less than scrupulous multinational companies? It's a staggering amount. $160,000 million every year. That's more than 1.5 times the entire global aid budget.
$160 billion is money which could be spent on new schools, hospitals and clinics, building roads and sanitation projects. But tax dodging is depriving developing countries of their just returns. Some multinational companies are siphoning money away from the countries where they actually generate their profits.
When we discuss development, we are discussing it from the focus of development aid. But that is not the real picture. The real story is that Africa is financing the world. There's much more money flowing out of Africa to the north.
We know that the amount of money flowing away from developing countries because of tax dodging is in fact far greater than the amount that they receive in aid. So for the sake of the world's poorest people, we need to trace the tax.
At the moment, it's very difficult to keep track of where the multinationals make their money, and it's almost impossible to persuade them to provide full details of their accounts. The companies report on their profits on a global basis, rather than breaking it down country by country.
El otro gran problema que estamos enfrentando es que en el Perú todo el tema de la tributación es prácticamente reservado, ¿no? Se maneja bajo el secreto total y absoluto. Es decir, la sociedad civil, la población peruana en general, no tiene acceso a toda la información sobre los tributos que pagan estas empresas, ¿no? Entonces, este tema del secreto tributario es uno de los problemas centrales que muestran la falta de transparencia en el Perú sobre estos temas, ¿no?
This lack of transparency allows some unscrupulous companies to give themselves a tax holiday by moving their profits to the places where they'll have to pay the least tax. These tax havens combine very low tax rates with very high levels of financial secrecy. Secrecy that can be used by companies to conceal money from tax authorities. It's part of the process known as capital flight.
Capital flight is money which should have been invested in Africa, but which, because people want to evade paying taxes where they are based or in the countries where they originate from, they sent it out to other jurisdictions where the tax rates are lower. So the money actually flows from Africa to those jurisdictions. Africa is not able anymore to benefit from those funds.
The problem has been, or still is, that the capacity of many African countries to monitor the practices of multinational companies, some of them which have revenues 3-4 times the GDP of these countries, they don't have the capacity to really monitor the practices of these companies.
Tax authorities in developing countries would find it much easier to detect tax dodging if companies had to declare what profits they're making in each country. That's why Christian Aid and others are calling for a new international accounting standard.
Bueno, en primer lugar, Christian Aid está colocando un tema que nos parece fundamental y que es sumamente útil en América Latina, es decir, está comenzando a discutir este tema tributario, ¿no? Y en la misma medida, las posibilidades de lograr un estándar internacional que apunte a la transparencia financiera, que apunte a que finalmente las empresas estén obligadas a informar sobre lo que pagan en nuestros países, sin duda va a ser una iniciativa que va a ser muy bien recibida en nuestros países y va a ayudar enormemente a que finalmente las políticas de transparencia se consoliden, ¿no?
It will be in our interest to support such an effort, because when we have greater transparency at the international level in terms of tax payment, we will have a lot more revenue in our country, because the companies that operate in our environment, a lot of them are also companies that operate in other countries.
And with those additional revenues, governments in developing countries could provide the kind of basic services that would help lift their citizens out of poverty.
In the Philippines, improving health services would mean that you reduce maternal mortality. We improve the feeding programs going on in the schools. We are able to provide more classrooms and things like that.
What can this money be used for? It can be used for many things. It can be used to improve agriculture, it can be used for education, it can be used to build infrastructure, it can be used to improve our maternal mortality rates, and it can also be used as a means of generating more wealth.
The housing that are standing just behind me is one step where the government is investing in building decent housing for families. Right now there are about 1,000 families that have been moved out of Kibera and been provided with decent housing, with clean water and a health dispensary. So this is the kind of impact dependency on own resources can have on development.
Companies would benefit too through better roads and infrastructure, as well as a healthier and better educated workforce. Taxes help to make governments more accountable, political systems more democratic, and countries more stable.
So how do we start to get things to change? Well, the first step towards ending tax dodging is financial transparency. Behind me are the offices of the International Accounting Standards Board, the IASB. They're the ones who set the rules for how companies report their accounts. We're asking them to introduce a new accounting standard. This would require all companies to report their profits and the taxes that they've paid in every country where they operate. Christian Aid is also calling on the world leaders to require tax havens to share the financial information that they hold. We want all governments to have the automatic right to access financial information about companies from any government who holds that information.
Christian Aid is stepping up its campaign on tax secrecy. We're trying to get multinational companies to support transparent reporting of their profits in individual countries.
We're fighting for tax justice! Tax justice!
And we're lobbying MPs.
The large companies seem to get away with avoiding tax.
It's not just that they miss out on the tax, we miss out on the tax as well.
I will certainly write to Vince Cable, and it seems to me that there is an awful lot we can do.
And we're telling corporate accountants that they could make a big contribution to tracing the tax too.
Were you aware that trade mispricing across developing countries about $160 billion a year in lost tax revenue?
Not particularly.
You were aware. Do you think that the accountancy profession has a role to play in stopping this?
It could help, I suppose.
And because tax transparency is a global issue, we need to persuade world leaders in the G20 to end tax haven secrecy.
By campaigning to trace the tax, we can put pressure on multinational companies as well as the institutions who regulate and monitor their accounts, and get them to work towards greater financial transparency. Then the world's poorest people will have a better chance of getting the tax revenue they're due and getting the lives they deserve for themselves and their children.